What happens when, after learning what is biologically possible when it comes to feeding babies and toddlers human milk, you intentionally surround yourself with people who will support you to reach your baby feeding goals? Janet tells the story of discovering what's possible and creating a ripple effect for herself and so many others, including me. This is a really special episode for me because Janet is one of my first breastfeeding influences. Listen to hear a beautiful story of intentionality that was not without difficulty. After beautiful births, her milk came in full force, and she discovered that she had to follow a different set of guidelines than what was given to her initially to manage oversupply, to avoid mastitis, and to best help her baby and take care of her own body. I hope you enjoy this amazing story. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
Hi, Janet. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Lo. Thanks for having me.
It feels very special to be talking to you. And I might get a little emotional here because I really feel when I look back at my own breastfeeding journey, I didn't know it at the time, but you were one of those people who created the pathway in my mind. And I think you did this very intentionally. You created the pathway in my mind to know what was possible for breastfeeding.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear that, though. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So I am so happy to be sitting down 9 years later and be hearing.
In 9 years, it has been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And be hearing about your introduction to breastfeeding and how it started for you, because we heard snippets. You were my childbirth educator, an intensive course for all of us high achievers when it came to childbirth education. But we focused some on breastfeeding. You did share snippets of your experiences, but also we just got to see you in your home breastfeeding your toddler but we didn't get to hear the full story. So I'm happy to get to be recording your story right now.
Yeah, I'm excited to share it.
Yeah. So before we get into it, why don't you introduce yourself and your family?
Sure.
And then we'll start talking about your experiences.
So I'm Janet Simone Parks. I have 2 children. One is 10 and the other is 13. I have been with my spouse, Brian, for many years, 17 years, and we taught childbirth education classes together. And I was a doula and a La Leche League leader. I did these things for about 10 years. I was working as a ballet dancer and performer at the time and went back to nursing school, and it was a circuitous path, but I am now working as a nurse midwife and have been for 2 years. And I was a labor and delivery nurse at a freestanding birth center before that. But yeah, I feel like this is an interesting view of what happens 10 years down the line, that momentum that we start, and we all have such mindful duration, all these decisions we make in babyhood and breastfeeding and however you choose to feed your baby is so integral to that whole package. But then you don't necessarily get to see that thrust of what does that look like 10 years later or whatever. But that's us.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. I always ask my guests what their exposure to breastfeeding was before it was their turn. So I would love to hear that.
Yeah, I think 2 people come to mind. One is a dear friend of my mom's, so we call her Aunt Patty, and she is an OBGYN and had in my mind, I was a young child. So in my mind, she had like a bajillion children. It's not that many, but she was often pregnant and would have babies. And I just thought it was the coolest thing to go over to their house and they would like chat and have tea and I would play with these babies. But I saw her breastfeeding. And I don't think I'd ever seen anybody else breastfeeding. My mom hadn't really discussed it with me. I was not nursed. My sister was for a little bit. I have an older sister. I don't think that was an intentional omission, but we're like a little bit uptight maybe in my upbringing, so we probably wouldn't talk about breasts anyway. But I had seen Aunt Patty nurse, so I knew that was a thing that happened, and her babies were being fed at her breast. And then fast forward many years later, which is sad to think that I can fast forward many years later before I had another exposure to breastfeeding in my life, really. But that's, I think, the truth. Brian and I had moved to Connecticut and had befriended this professor at Wesleyan who had a 2-year-old that she was nursing. And I remember seeing that the first time and thinking, what am I seeing? That was just a totally new world to me. This was a really intelligent, warm, kind woman. And there was so much in my body and brain that was thinking like, weird. I didn't know. And I realized like, there is a lot I don't know. It turns out this is a whole chapter that maybe I should investigate a little bit. We knew we wanted to start a family and it was not something I'd really even considered before. But those are mamas that come to mind.
Okay. And so then what was, once that triggered something in your brain, what did you do to learn more about a 2-year-old nursing or breastfeeding in general?
Yeah, I think I had fallen into this really amazing group of other mothers this is a little bit later, right, when I was having my first. And their stories were really helpful and really supportive. Like being in that sea was going to let what I was doing be possible. But I think prior to that, it was this same professor at Wesleyan who gave me a book when I first became pregnant, not about natural birth or breastfeeding or any of these things specifically. Oh, I'm thinking of the title. I believe it's called What's Going On in There. I have it on the shelves somewhere, but it's about the neurological development from conception through about age 5. And there was a chapter in there about physiologic birth and impact or no impact of certain pharmaceutical interventions. And just, I hadn't really thought about those things before. And it made me look at this bodily thing that we can do, especially as a dancer, someone that was pretty heavily influenced by embodiment and being physically aware. And I think that was this trajectory to wanting to know more about feeding a baby. Oh, if there's this physiologic development that's happening with their hearing, and then what's normal in birth with the birthing person's body, like all these things that were normal, it's probably normal to be feeding a baby from your body as well, maybe for many years, as it would seem. So I went from that book to some anthropological like texts that I loved, which also really normalized breastfeeding for a number of years, which I hadn't been seeing in my own cultural experience, but it was cool to read about it. And then I feel like I opened my eyes and saw that it was happening all around me. And those people then became my friends and my support. I read my first anime book or whatever, and this whole path was carved. But I think it was, again, that this book of seeing what is normal and what, could be expected from the body.
Yeah. What could be normal physiologically versus what is normal culturally is an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned something that I am interested in, and I don't know if you've ever discussed this with your mom since, but you mentioned that you have an older sister that was breastfed and then you were not. Have you ever discussed that with her since then?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit. When I was going through my childbirth education classes, they encouraged us to have conversations about birth and breastfeeding with the birthing people in your family, hear their stories. They probably want to share them, which, as you know, is true, regardless of the paths we take and how we birth or how we feed. People want to share those stories, and I loved hearing them. So I feel like I got that green light. Go ask your mother. I talked to my grandmother before she passed away about her breastfeeding experiences. But with my mom, she said my sister was premature, not by a significant amount, but maybe 6 weeks. Significant, but she was fine. But she was little and sleepy, and it was very difficult to keep her awake. And they were just trying to put on the pounds. And this was, I'm going to throw out her age here so she'll kill me later. This was 1976. So I think really the norm at that point we had shifted to for some like communities. My dad's a physician. I think they were like, this is too difficult. Keeping this baby awake, asking this of my body every few hours. I don't think there was a real reason to keep doing that for her. She didn't have that desire. So they switched to formula. And then when they got pregnant with me, like 7 years later, she said she really didn't even give it a thought. That's what worked before. Breastfeeding was hard. Your sister didn't want to do it. She was sleepy. And we knew that the bottle would work. I think she really liked that control of knowing I am feeding my baby an adequate amount. I am giving them what they should have. She just chose to do it. So it wasn't like that she had set out on a journey to be really successful and exclusively breastfeed and then had a lot of issues. And I don't even really from her story hear that she had a lot of issues and just wasn't getting the support, which is often, I think, the case. We just don't know where to go for help or don't know that it's normal to have questions and have bumps along the road. I think she just was like, I could take it or leave it. And so it wasn't important for her the next birth.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's interesting. So once you then were opened up to this idea of natural physiological birth and then also physiological breastfeeding, did you set goals for yourself in that prenatal period?
I did, because I wanted to give myself like every opportunity to do what I believed would be like a normal expectation. But I think a lot of new birthing people want to be kind to yourself and know that there could be changes along the way and we have to be flexible. I knew that I was going to need to know who to call. Like, I really want to try and meet these goals. I really want to breastfeed for like years if I can. I really wanted to do that. I'm going to need to know who to call, which is part of what got me interested in the Leche League. I went to a meeting while I was pregnant, and then I had these mothers who were doing all different age kids breastfeeding, and one of them was pregnant at the time also. Yeah, I had the goal. I really wanted this to happen, but I was fearful. I think like everyone, will I be that person that can't? It seemed so normal that so many people were told, for whatever reason, you can't breastfeed. And when we first went into all this, I know Brian and I thought there's a good chance that could be me too, so it'll be okay. And then as we got further along, I realized that the number of people who can truly not be successful breastfeeding in any way, it's real small. It does happen, but it is certainly not the numbers that we would hear reported culturally. So I was hoping to meet those goals, but I knew it was really important to me. I really wanted it. I think it was almost a fallback from being fearful of wanting to have an unmedicated birth. That might not happen, but I can still feed my baby. Someone will help me, and I'll have support and I'll have some time to get it in place.
One of the biggest indicators of whether a person meets their baby feeding goals is how supported they feel. If you are pregnant and would help setting goals or would like to know how to best set yourself up for success and want to have a number on speed dial, I would love to be that person for you. If you have already had your baby and need an anchor in the storm to help you navigate baby feeding to get you to your goals, reach out. Let's reduce your baby feeding anxiety together. You can find me at www.quabbinbirthservices.com, linked in the show notes, as always. And if you just want to join a group of people who know how difficult baby feeding can be, given all of the inequities that exist systemically and culturally, you can join my growing Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. We're there to really discuss anything that makes baby feeding difficult. See you there.
So as you look at those first breastfeeding moments, was there anything that happened in your birthing experiences that impacted that early breastfeeding, either positively or negatively, that you can recall, especially knowing what you know now? As you knew a lot then, but you've learned more and more as you've grown in your own knowledge, in your support of people, and in your practice now as a nurse.
I have to just like compliment and dote all over my providers. They did amazing. I really feel like I was set up to successfully meet those goals. I was lucky to have a really low risk, normal, healthy pregnancy. We don't even have to talk about the birth much to just like it was clinically uneventful in the most
Mhm.
perfect way. So my
Mhm.
first one was at a out of hospital birth center, and that was it. They put this naked baby on my chest right away. Nobody took it. Everything had been really pretty calm, pretty normal. I hadn't really needed any kind of intervention. The nurse and the midwives there, and I had a student midwife, were all really helpful, but also I think aware that I wanted to, as a dancer, you want to take direction really well and do it right. And sometimes you can't do that with breastfeeding. It's going to be awkward and brand new and like maybe painful, or you're laying down and you've got six chins and you can't see what's happening. Like it's awkward in the beginning. So they also just gave me some space, which I was able to have because nobody was in a rush to take care of me. I was fine. I was stable. Baby was fine. They were tiny. My first was 5'13". I think if I had a tiny baby in another setting, it could be that more people would be nervous about it and wanting to take her or supplement or whatever. But I think I was really set up to be successful. We had that early skin to skin. I had lots of pointers and then a breath for me to try and do it, be with this baby, see how it goes. I remember we had a really nice latch for a while on one side. I couldn't get it on the other. This was probably a few hours after birth. I took a shower. Baby was skin to skin with Brian while I showered. Then I came back. We got the other side. I felt like they set me up on top of the world. It was great. However, it was the first time breastfeeding. So, of course, there were also problems for me. A few days later, I had bleeding, I had blisters, I was crying through nursings. It was not all rainbows. I had set up so well and initiated. My milk was coming in beautifully, but it was so painful. Mostly on one side. She had a compound presentation, so her little fist was by her face. And I had one of the friends who was trying to hold me up in support was a chiropractor, and she did craniosacral work and was also like in the La Leche League group I was in. And she's, Janet, can I please come over and look at your baby? I think her jaw's wonky and that's why you latch on the left. And I remember driving like with my adult diapers and just like fresh postpartum, you're fluid everywhere and a little bit weepy. And we drove to this homeschool group she was in because she was there at the time. I don't know. And she did some craniosacral work on Orion and like she latched immediately. It was like magic. Before that time, I'd called my pediatrician, who was a family practitioner there, who also had an LC on staff. And I felt like that was a really good indication that they were going to know how to support me. And she was the one who said, you can stop for a minute. We can express, you can use your hands. I thought if I didn't keep putting that baby to the breast, that I wouldn't have milk. I have to keep doing this. I was crying, I was bleeding, but I didn't want to stop. And she was really helpful to explain to me, like, that's not stopping. This skin needs to heal. We can empty the breast in a lot of ways. Give this a little bit of time. And then I think the next day met with Jen, who did this adjustment. And it was comfortable enough to have an actual latch at the breast then. And it was really pretty smooth after that. My nipples healed. We were able to do the thing. I had an oversupply issue, which feels like kind of a gift in some ways, especially now knowing how many women with undersupply that I've been helping. But oversupply is its own kind of beast. I was really prone to clogged ducts. In that first year with Orion, I had multiple bouts of mastitis. I didn't really know yet how to manage them, how to get in a massage or clear paths before things got worse. And that would go on for like the duration of my breastfeeding, even when she was 2 and 3. If I would get in more workouts that week or wear a different sports bra or a crossbody bag, like I would still get these clogged ducts and have to stop my whole life and kind of treat my boobs for a while. So it was a very smooth journey in some ways, but I think it was not without the typical ups and downs, issues that I really needed help with. And there were people there to help me, which was amazing.
And it's really important that you mention that the people that were helping you were providing the right type of help. So that LC that you spoke with, she didn't say you can stop and you can supplement with formula because that's not what you wanted. She said you can let your nipples heal and get the milk out in another way
Mm-hmm.
and feed it to baby. How were you feeding the milk to baby while you were letting your nipples heal
I
during
had
that time?
plenty in the other side. I didn't
Okay.
even need to give her extra milk. It was just pouring out of me.
Okay. So it was just on one side that you were feeling the most amount of pain and that you were
Mhm,
having the cracked nipples, which
mhm.
isn't uncommon. And so it's really important that practitioners understand what your goals are.
This practice was amazing, especially with my tiny baby. Being a first time at it, like I can see 9 out of 10 people I might have called who would have said, supplement for a few days, let your body heal, and then go from there. So it was, amazing that I got really.
And it's not that supplementation is never called for or
Mhm.
never needed,
Mhm.
but given the whole picture.
Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together.
Yeah. I'm grateful to all those people in those early weeks.
Yeah. And when you talk about the adjustment, a lot of people don't understand what goes into craniosacral therapy. And when they hear about adjustments on a baby, they get a little
Yeah.
freaked out. I actually saw this TikTok video and they were showing a chiropractor turning a baby upside down and saying, never send your baby to a chiropractor. And so, can you just describe the craniosacral therapy that was done on your infant? It was not turning your baby upside down.
It was not. Honestly, I was pretty new to chiropractic care also. I really had never, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I had never seen a chiropractor myself until my pregnancy. And this was not even that. There was no cracking. This craniosacral work, I remember we did a couple different positions. So my little sweet baby was just lying in her lap and she was like, I don't know, massaging her sacrum, massaging her neck. It just looked like she was loving on her. At the time, I really had no anatomical knowledge too. Not none, but I was a new mom, not a medical person at the time. So I wish my recollection was more precise, but she just loved on her for a minute with this gentle kind of massage. She was on her side in her lap, and then she was face down with her little head to the side on her lap. And then she handed her back to me. The whole thing was a few minutes, and the baby was very happy, and there was no twisting and turning or cracking involved.
It's very light touch.
Yeah.
It's very light touch.
And then she had a really extreme, we were practicing elimination communication with my second one. That's a later story. But when he was adjusted, there was a huge blowout after the time. And Orion also extreme poops that day, which I didn't realize was probably related to that release and just alignment and all the magic that they were doing. But yeah, it just looked like a friend would rub your baby while they're holding them for a minute. I really had no concerns about her safety in that moment.
Yeah. And chiropractors who practice craniosacral therapy, this is additional training that they do.
Yes.
It's specialized training.
Yeah. Similarly to my clients now who are looking for chiropractic adjustments in pregnancy, always make sure that those people have specialized training. There's certain techniques, there's other just along the way things they'll learn, but some people really thrive in that setting with pregnant people or babies, and you always want to find someone who has that training. It's not just anyone who does chiropractic care, but it's amazing when you find someone who's really skilled and enjoys doing it. Makes a big difference.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you mentioned was oversupply. And I know it can be, for somebody who has undersupply or low milk supply, it can be hard to hear somebody complaining about oversupply, but it can be problematic for both the parent and the baby. And it can be hard to manage. You mentioned getting mastitis repeatedly, which is
awful.
So painful. It's awful. It's
awful.
Like you've been hit like a Mack truck.
I got better at managing that with the next one, but yeah, it's crazy. And issues with baby, even when they were older, because that milk might not be, they're not always getting to the breast and getting the type of milk that they're kind of asking for because there's just so much. So sometimes we would have to nurse in only one position, or sometimes I would have to let off the letdown. But so those first letdowns were just, there was no way a child could grab onto that. It was too much. And then what really hurt my heart through the way is like, I had all this milk and I was like, oh, great, I can donate. like I can be that person that can help fill the milk bank. I think there was only one in Massachusetts nearby at the time. And I looked into all this stuff, and I remember talking to my midwives who were like, I don't know that you should pump. I couldn't. If I pumped at all, I made more. It was like a weird little devastating story. I had too much milk for myself, and I couldn't share my oversupply, because if I put a pump to my breast, I would for sure get another clogged duct and possibly mastitis, and my baby couldn't latch. I'd just become engorged right away. It was a lot.
Yeah. So too much milk for your baby, but you did not want to create a problem of having way too much milk.
Yeah, unless I guess that could have been my literal full-time job if I
Right.
just had no life at all and pumped and then fed my baby.
Right.
Which at that
Yeah.
point, I was such a staunch advocate for breast milk. I would have wanted to do that, but that's not a life. You do actually need to be able to
Do other things.
live your life and not just pump your breast milk. But it was a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And did you ever see any of those signs of oversupply in your children?
I did initially. We had some kind of frothy greenish stool. I mentioned that she was small, and she wasn't like crazy small, but little. And she would come off and sputter and cough and kind of gag choke with those letdowns. Then just the frequency. I think every mom is wondering, do I do one breast? Do I do both breasts? Do I burp in between? Do I burp? And like all these questions are individual to each little dyad. So I really can't answer them. It just depends on how it's going for you. Of course, someone who's working with a person who's feeding their baby with their body can hone in and give them more specific advice. So if I went back and forth, I tried to do the thing. Like I thought I had read, okay, if I start on this breast and then I end over here, I'll wear this rubber band on this wrist or whatever so that I'll start over here again. But I really, like, my body was begging me to block feed and really truly get to the bottom and empty a breast. They weren't ever getting to that really empty state. So I felt blindsided by that, because I had been follow the baby's cues. Do they need to burp? Do they need to switch? And see how it feels. And I didn't realize what a truly air quote empty breast felt like, and that I needed to get there at least twice in my waking hours or something, which may or may not happen. So it was just figuring out those cues, but I was seeing that stuff in the baby, and the resources I had were able to say, do you think that maybe you make a lot of milk? Is your letdown strong? Do you feel it multiple times throughout a feeding? Was the poop different if she had nursed, maybe slept for a few minutes and then nursed right again? Like that would go smoother, which was all pointing towards, yes, you probably have an oversupply.
If you are hearing this and are now asking yourself if you have an oversupply, I've got you. Episode 42 of the Milk Making Minutes is called Could My Baby's Fussiness Be from Oversupply? Is a great place to get more information about this topic. Many people who deal with oversupply also suffer from mastitis, which can be another sign. The treatment for mastitis has changed recently, so if you want to know if you are treating it most effectively, check out episode 32, Stop Massaging During Mastitis and What to Do Instead. Both episodes will be linked in the show notes.
And then once you did start that block feeding, did you notice a difference in your baby's ability to maybe have longer stretches between feedings, anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like they were really getting to the fat and protein that their bodies were trying to get. So for both of them, we just go by feel, like, which was hard for a person who likes to have a lot of control. I like to know what's what. It was already going to be risky for me. I'm not going to know exactly how much my baby's getting. That's hard for me. And then when I was told you go back and forth or you offer both breasts during each feed, I thought, okay, those are rules I can follow. But the way that ended up working for me was not that at all. I would just stick on one side until I felt I shouldn't. I was constantly touching my breast and, okay, it's squishy enough now, we'll switch. But the feedings would be more sustained. She would be more comfortable in between. The bowel movements looked more kind of typical breast milk poops at that point. So it was definitely the right way for us to do it, but it was a little more like diving into the unknown there.
It can be a challenge when we are told these rules by people in the hospital. Start on one side, go to the next side every time. And rules can be helpful, but really we should see them as kind of guideposts, not a rule book.
I think I was set up, as I think every subsequent feeding of a baby is going to be easier. I was set up really well to forget all the rules the next time around. Okay,
Yeah.
I've done this once. I'm going in with a lot more confidence, which I think is like 98% of people's success the second time around. You just believe you can. You might come up with different problems or pain or whatever, but you can do it now. Whatever your goals were, you can work toward them.
Right.
I had another really uncomplicated birth. I had that one at home. You know, I had another massive oversupply, but I knew what to do right away. And I feel like that changed the whole picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you knew how to better manage the oversupply and the mastitis that second
Mhm.
time
Yeah,
around. Did you start block feeding right away with the
I
second? Or
did.
uh-huh.
Yeah, I started block feeding right away. Started going to the potty right away with that one, which I didn't do until Orion was about 3 months old.
For anyone who is curious to learn more, Janet's family practiced elimination communication. They would catch poops and pees and have a sound associated with each one. Over time, the baby would learn to associate the sound with the action of pooping and peeing. And over time, the baby could pee or poop when hearing that sound. And then before you knew it, the baby could poop or pee on their own at a very young age. I actually got to witness Janet's kids doing this on my own and thought I might try it myself, but then didn't actually ever put it into action. But a lot of people do. So if you want to know more about this, feel free to look it up. There are all sorts of books. I'm sure there are podcasts and lots of communities that practice elimination communication if you want to know more.
But it was fun for me to really have like immediate feedback on what the poops looked like. Were we getting into frothy territory or not? Because in the beginning, there was still a day or two where I wasn't engorged. My milk was not fully there. I had nursed through my pregnancy a little bit, but then stopped in the last trimester. It was just painful. So I feel like it took a minute for my milk to come back in. So I was trying to like gauge from baby's behavior and baby's poop more so than what my breasts felt like, because they weren't like totally full of milk yet, or at least full to the degree that I knew they would get. But it went so much smoother. It was just easier to manage with knowing I can block feed, knowing just from those early weeks, like, should there be injuries to my nipples or pain with this latch? I'm going to fix it. It's going to be okay. These are things we can work through. If this is still my goal, we can probably meet it. So I think I went in with a lot more confidence. But that baby, Albin, had an easier go of it. He didn't have the like fire hose let down as often because I knew better at that point. I was comfortable letting that off into the burp cloth or whatever. Now, of course, I'm so old. They didn't have Hakas back then. Now, of course, I think, goodness, what could I have collected if I had one of these devices to collect the letdown on the other side? But
Right.
that's okay.
And then your goal is to nurse both of them for years, and you accomplished that, right? Oh.
I did. In this bubble of supportive people who thought that was normal, right? I shouldn't say everyone, because the world at large did not tell me this is normal. I lived in Connecticut, but my family was in Atlanta. And every time I would travel or come to Atlanta, I felt like a freak. No one was nursing, which is not what I'm seeing now. I'm proud to say I take care of a lot of people who are successfully feeding babies in all kinds of ways, including nursing toddlers. But I wasn't seeing it then. So Orion nursed steadily and through the night, and it was just pretty simple because I had these people telling me this is a relationship with two people. If you're both happy in it, then, you don't have to make changes. When you're ready to make some shift in that relationship, whether you want a night wean or you're done altogether or whatever, it has to feel good for both parties all along. So if you're feeling over it, that's a reason to change that relationship. But for me, it was feeling great. So we just kept on going. I got pregnant with Albin and I thought, I'm going to be one of those goddess women who nurses through their pregnancy and it's going to be amazing. And then it was like spiders crawling on me and it hurt so much and it drove me crazy. He was about almost 3.5 when he was born. So she was 3 and change when we started cutting back. I wasn't nursing at night. It was such a beautiful transition with a toddler because she was old enough for me to speak these words to her and say, this is not comfortable. This is hurting, Mama. I love you. Can we do this instead? Or we'll nurse for this period of time and then let's snuggle and read or what. And like giving her options was an option. For me, I was not ready to stop at 3 or 6 months or whatever, but so many people do. And I think that part of it must be such a challenge because you can't communicate that with a infant the way I could with this older child. But she was very kind about it and we did stop. I won't say she didn't start again when Albin was born. She had, I think, forgotten in her mouth how to really nurse, but she still wanted it. So sometimes I'd let off that extra bit and she would have that. Sometimes she would try and latch, but that didn't go on long. So I'd say she was still really done by 3.5-ish. Alban, again, it was feeling great. We were comfortable sleeping together, nursing at night. I didn't need to make a change to those things. He was growing well. It felt good to me. We went for a long time.
Mhm.
We moved to Georgia and it was hard. I saw both kids struggle just with a big change. I think when they're little, they're not necessarily attached to their friends the way like a middle schooler would be, but it was just a totally different place, new community. We had family here and it was a great spot to land, but it was new. So I feel in that moment for sure, I was very grateful to still be nursing this 2+ year old because that was a really constant thread. He felt safe. He felt like this is the thing I know and love. It'll be in Atlanta too. We kept on going until 4, I think.
Mhm.
He and I had talked about weaning. At that point, he was not really nursing at night. He would come in the wee hours of the morning, maybe nurse for a minute and then like snuggle in bed with us until we woke up. But I don't even think there was an official like nighttime or even early morning nurse. He was really just nursing before the nap and before bed. So maybe 3 total. And we talked about it at his 4th birthday. He brought it up like, I don't know, we didn't really use like big boy, like that kind of language with him, but he just felt like I'm older now and maybe I don't need it. I make all this good food. He likes to cook a lot. So he really felt that he was the cook in the kitchen.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, this is not something your body has to have. Do you feel grown up that you don't want to do that? We can snuggle in other ways. We'll just have our books or whatever. And we just stopped. I remember it being right around the 4th birthday, but I don't even remember the last nursing exactly. It was
Mm.
probably that July, but it was very comfortable. We just
Mm.
did other things.
And did that oversupply adjust over the years?
By the time they were like 2, which is still a long time of oversupply,
Yeah.
but by the time they were like 2, my breasts were not back to normal size. I have very small breasts in general, but like they were pretty deflated. I wouldn't necessarily get uncomfortable if we went a longer stretch. There would be nights where they weren't going to nurse through the night anymore. Like it had definitely become more manageable. I think my feeding from my body probably felt more like for normal people, it could have
Mm.
felt at a year, but it probably took until about age 2 for them. But so the next half of the nursing for Alban was really easy, not having to navigate that, except for the working out thing. When I worked out more, because I'm a dancer, I was running, I did Pilates, like I did a lot of things, but when I would add in more in a week, which was inevitably when my mother would come to visit us when we were still in Connecticut, she would visit, we'd want to give her a little time with the kids, and I would go for extra, whatever, ballet class, run, what have you, I would still get clogged ducts.
Mm.
So I was navigating that, but I wasn't having to alter the way in which we were nursing or the frequency, or I wasn't really thinking about block feeding anymore. That kind of stuff had become a thing of the past.
And do you think that was because you were wearing like tighter fitting support, or do you think that was because there wasn't like extra snacking at the breast at the time? Why do you think that was the association between the working out and the clogged ducts?
Yeah, I don't know. It was like such an A to B that I couldn't deny it, but I don't really
Yeah,
have a great reason for it. It's not like I wore a different sports bra to take a run when she was visiting, but
right.
my body had created this homeostasis with X amount of output in
Mm.
exercise a week. Okay, we can handle this. And whatever that might have been at the time, when it got tipped, it just didn't,
Wow.
couldn't adjust. I don't know. It was really weird because it was
Yeah.
such a welcome thing. Brian and I'm not like a runner, by the way. So it's funny. I keep mentioning running, or I feel like I'm not a runner. I've been doing it for years, but I'm just like, I'm slow and awkward. I'm a ballet dancer. So I feel like we can't say we're runners, but that's something that Brian and I have always done together. And we love to go and we run and we chat. We do this now. That's like how we catch up. So it was so fun when a grandparent was in town, we could take runs together, not with
Mm.
the baby jogger, not with panicking or having to stop, or not one at a time, like really go be together. So maybe they were longer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a funny correlation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I thank you so much for sharing these stories. And it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about oversupply and mastitis. It's such a challenge to people trying to feed babies from their bodies, and it comes up again and again. And it can, even in a beautiful, amazing story, it can be one of those things that you were super determined, but for other people who, if it starts happening again and again, they
Yeah.
might be like, okay, that's it, we're
Yeah,
switching, you know?
for sure. Yeah. I think it's like of note that even people who have maybe even easy experiences and journeys that go on forever like mine, there were still moments where it could have really, there was a fork in the road. There was some point where one of them would only nurse lying down. So I would have to like literally lay down in the Stop and Shop and nurse. And it was like, okay, I can't be doing this. How long could I possibly do this? But then I met with a friend. This was in the La Leche group. And it was just all these people who were like, have you tried all these new, like weird positions? Like just try something else. Because we had tried going into a dark room and having no distractions and doing those things. But I would just have to take off my shirt and lay down. I'm like, I cannot go on. And I feel like that would have been a really easy moment to just maybe call it. Was it teeth? Was it a growth spurt? Was it all those things? Again, there were people who were like, let's try X, Y, and Z. And then in the end, she really liked, this was with Orion, kind of straddling my thigh and facing me and being like, okay. She was not really old enough to sit upright, but that was what we're trying this new thing. That was yet another moment where maybe without those people to support me and the real desire to keep going, it would have been really easy to be like, okay, I'm out. I'm not laying down in the supermarket.
Did you actually lay down in a supermarket?
Yes. I did. Like I had no choice. She was screaming in the carrier. I remember that was before we called. It was the same lactation consultant at the place who had helped me initially and gave me such great advice. We called them leaving because I was just like distraught. And she was going to see me, and she told me the advice of, okay, let's try and take away all the distractions. Really, and great advice. Go back to that laid back position or go in a dark room and all these things, which also in the moment, after I had just nursed on a grocery store floor, I'm like, okay, I can't also go to a dark room every time I need to nurse. But I understand that she was offering a reset. But I did that, and that still didn't fix it. Like she really just needed me to lay down. So who knows? Maybe it was just we needed this matter of weeks to work it out. But by the time we found some other positions, she was game to do it again in a way that would work with my life. But that could have been the end.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who knows if she would have taken a bottle sitting upright at that moment either.
No, she never did. So
yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that switching to formula will fix the problem.
Right.
And sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that image. I don't for you, but all these years later.
There's enough space now. It's funny.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and putting up with my kind of post-call brain.
No, it's been amazing. And I thank you for being such an instrumental person to me. I really didn't know it at the time, but when I look back and I think there are those moments that you can pin and you think that was it. Someone was asking me recently, like, who were the people that were instrumental? Mm-hmm. I had seen my sister breastfeed. Mm-hmm. I had seen one cousin breastfeed. And then I had seen you breastfeed a toddler.
Yeah. We took it to just level 10.
Yeah. And you know what? My oldest fed until he was 3.5. And Jolie, my daughter, she just stopped around 4.5. And she just turned 5. And like even just a couple days ago, she was like, can I try to nurse again? And I was like,
yeah, you can try, but they probably won't be able to. And that's that. But it's just amazing. Thank you for recognizing me as some person that had a piece in your story.
Yeah, this has been amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Lo.
You never know who you might be influencing just by feeding your baby in the way that feels right for you. I signed up for Janet's childbirth education class, and she fed her toddler openly while teaching our class. That shaped me, and I knew that was what I wanted for my children too. 9 years later, after having breastfed both of my own children well into toddlerhood, I am myself a childbirth educator and an IBCLC, helping others meet their baby feeding goals, whatever they may be. With so many cultural and systemic barriers, it is refreshing to be reminded of relationships like this. I had not spoken to Janet since my son was newly born. If you would like to positively impact someone else's postpartum journey, share an episode of the podcast that you think will be relevant to them. And then please take a moment to rate and review the Milk Making Minutes. I have been writing reviews for my favorite podcasts, and it takes me like 60 seconds. It really helps those of us like me that are one-woman shows. I am mostly a one-woman show. If you've ever wanted to know who composed my custom-made music, it was Nella Ruiz. You can find her website in my show notes. Thanks, and bye. Hey, Charlie, do you think there's an age that is too old to breastfeed?
If you ask me, I think if both mom and baby, they're both healthy and they're both breastfeeding daily and everything, I think that they should be free to breastfeed to whatever age is healthiest. Doesn't really matter.
Great. Do you remember breastfeeding?
Not really.
Do you remember how old you were when you stopped?
Do you?
Yeah, you were like 3.5.
Oh.
Thank you.